Let's go. Let's
Hey
go.
everyone, welcome to another Visor Weekly. As usual, I'm Lee Tanya, one of the co-founders and CEO of Visor. I got Mike here as we do every week, and we got a really special guest, Christopher Nelson. We've known each other for a while, on and off the different aspects of wealth management, real estate investing, tech. It's great to have you on. Before we dive in, I'm just getting some housekeeping. Guys, I want to remind you all, please, this is not a presentation. We're not doing any slides unless it's really important. It's a conversation. So please unmute yourself. If you disagree with what we're saying or you completely agree, tap in, share your insight. You can tap in the chat as well. For those who are joining the recording, it's always more fun for you guys to join live. So try to make it next time. And everyone here's on the call. If you drop off, we're recording anyway. So without further ado, Christopher, welcome.
Thank
Excited
you
to
so
have you.
much. Appreciate it.
The idea of this conversation is going to be something that, I found myself in the wealth management financial industry by chance, right? Selling company, having some money, starting to deploy, and then having the good problems of managing it, right? And so,
Right.
I wasn't at all intentional about how things have evolved, although over the years I've been trying to be more intentional about managing my wealth because it is money and it needs to continue to grow and worked hard for it. And when Christopher, Mike, and I were talking a couple days ago before the call, and it's about family offices, of course. It's sort of one of these things that hit us is that, no matter how much wealth we have, can be, half a million, a million, 10 million, 100 million, a billion, whether we like it or not, we're managing a family office. You can call it in other, shapes or forms, but the fundamentals of a family office, and we're going to define it in a second, are what we're all doing with our wealth. And so I wanted Christopher to come on and talk about that. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Christopher, just to give some background.
Sure.
And then, just to set it up, if you can define how you see what a family office is.
Be happy to do that. So thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the group coming, showing up. My name is Christopher Nelson. I run a company called Wealth Ops. Wealth Ops is the engine behind the micro family office. And so I get this question all the time. What is a family office? A family office, simply put, is you're building a business around your wealth, and that business has framework, it has infrastructure, and it can be easily passed on to the next generation. That's the concept of a family office in its most basic sense.
Do you know the history of it, Christopher, a bit?
As a matter of fact, I do. Yeah. So the history of family offices actually goes back centuries, where it used to be in feudal times, they had somebody called a major domo, who was somebody who helped manage royalty wealth. And then their job was to manage it as a business, profit and loss, understanding the balance sheet. Obviously, they had different terms back then. And then their goal was to pass that off to whoever was then the next prince who ascended to royalty. Now in the modern times, the first family office that we have recorded was really back in the late 1800s, was John D. Rockefeller, and there's a fascinating use case of family office versus managing your wealth as a pile of money, and that is the Vanderbilts versus the Rockefellers. So 1880, both families had close to Vanderbilt at that point was actually wealthier than Rockefeller's. $100 billion in today's value was the Vanderbilts. Rockefellers were probably about half of that in the 1880s. The difference was the Vanderbilts, three generations later, when they all met up in the 1970s, 150 of them, not a single one was an inherited millionaire. The reason behind it is they had no vision, they had no structure. It was literally a pile of money to be spent, and spent it was. John D. Rockefeller, who is the first family office in the United States modern era, he built a business that had a clear purpose for the betterment of humanity. He made sure that all of his kids understood the principles, how to actually operate the family office. In 7 generations later, today, still relevant, still growing, still building their wealth.
Love it.
Yeah.
And I also think since that era, the term of family office has been, you know, adopted by much lower levels of income as the decades progressed, right? Like back in
Yes,
the day, if you didn't have $1 billion+, the word family
Mm.
office, you wouldn't even know what it means.
That's right.
And I can say, at least in Israel, you sell a company, you make, you know, a couple $1 million, you go to a multifamily office. It's like totally what it's not meant for. It's all, we can open that as a whole different discussion. But like there's
Sure.
the terminology of family office, I feel like has become much more commonly used today than it used to be in the past. So I appreciate the rundown of that. Okay,
Sure.
so do you agree that no matter what level of wealth we're at, we all are running a type of a family office?
Agreed. I mean, and then I think the question is like we are running a family office because let's break that down. I think to the core elements is we have this wealth that could last for generations, even if it's a smaller amount, managed well, could be managed for generations. That is the same sort of tenant. There is a business aspect to it. I think the question is what's the quality of our business?
Why do you think so many people ask themselves the question where is it worth it for me to even set up a family office? Because everyone sort of, I know for me, like the first impression is it's just freaking expensive.
Well, are you
Right.
talking about setting up your own family office or getting
Well,
an
I'm saying,
advisor? Because yeah, if you've got under 75 to 100 million, it's pretty expensive to set up your own
no,
family office.
I agree, but I'm saying if we agree that we all are running our own family office, then
Sure.
what's the difference between what I just said and de facto having a family office? Isn't it, if we are already running a family office, what makes it institutionalized?
Well, I think the difference, so let's break it down. So let's talk about, so I help people run what's called microfamily office. This is the framework for people with $1 to $30 million net worth. Then the next step up is going to be what? A multifamily office, which that would be shared resources, say 30 to $100 million. $100 million plus, and sometimes that can move a little bit north. Is it 100 million or 500 million where, what that single family office is, you hire the team and their full-time job is to manage your wealth. So then if we scale backwards as we do, we're tech guys, what I propose is that we leverage the same frameworks, right? We leverage the same 7 components that go into every single family office, whether you're small or large, it's 7 components. And then you leverage fractional experts in technology to help you execute your family office, but you leverage the same methodology to make sure that you're not missing any components.
Is there any reason that can't sustain also a larger single family office?
Well, I mean, that's sort of my company is actually proving that out. I literally had somebody join my program a week ago as $100 million who said, I want to scale this through fractional resources. I don't know if I ever want to go full family office. So I'll tell you in a few months.
All right,
Yeah.
let's sort of move along here and sort of what is the most important
Yeah.
component you
Well,
think?
before we move on, I'm going to tell a cautionary tale that I heard just last night. So I was at an investor event. It was mostly a bunch of RIAs, and there was a founder who had run his company for over 30 years. He had an
Yeah.
exit, $10 million exit. Came to this RIA, which they do something like, I think similar to you, Christopher. It's a fee based, we'll advise you, we'll help you, that kind of thing. And the guy heard their pitch and was like, nope, 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 I've got it figured out. Invested 80% of his net worth, 8 million, into one deal with his good buddy who had done this stuff for a long time. 9 months later, it was all gone. Of completely, the bank had taken it back and it was over. And the guy had spent an entire lifetime building the company and doing all
Hmm.
that and felt like he's a grinder. He's one of those people. It's like, look, I know how to do it. I'm going to do it myself. I'm just going to work hard. And he took that same mentality to then harboring his, like stewarding his wealth going forward, and got his ass kicked right away due to some just poor choices that if he'd gotten help would have never, he wouldn't have gotten any, wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have had that concentration risk and that kind of thing. And that's what I see over and over where people, why you end up losing things is oftentimes over concentration and just not understanding things. And so it's just one of those things that this is, no matter where you're at on that wealth scale, whether you're at a million or you're at 30 million or 50 million, you're in charge of this, and you have to, whether, whatever level you're going with and how much help you want, but you've got to get some advice and make sure that you're not screwing this up. It's because it's easy to do.
Well, and that's why my company comes at it from a different perspective, because we're an education company, in the sense that, to your point, where I feel where this guy broke one of the tenets, right, is the second component of the microfamily office, right, or family offices in general, is portfolio architecture, your structure. And what does that have to do? Like, what's the core foundation there is your investment sizing. If you get that wrong, you can fail. And so I think that there's so many people out there that, to your point, they either DIY or they give it away, where we're trying to fill this gap that says everybody needs to understand the playing field, who are the players, what are the rules, and how do you play to win. That's most important.
So let's go through the top of it, which is, we talked about this pre-call, right? The most important aspect of it is understanding that you are in charge, right?
That's right. That's right.
So
Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Yeah, start.
No, yeah, because I was going to say is that the most important thing, right? And the first component of any family office, right, is the fact that you are the CEO, and as the CEO, you have to set the vision and the strategy. And then you also need to understand what's the CEO role. So the first decisions that you're going to make as a CEO is there's going to be three key decisions that you're going to need to make, that you have choices. Number one is, and this is I think, if you think about a lot of financial advisory firms, this is the decision they want you to make, which you can abdicate. You can say, I don't want to be the CEO. I'm going to go bring in somebody. They're going to own the outcome, and I'm going to pass everything on to them. I don't want to manage my money. But that's a CEO decision, and you've decided you're going to abdicate. The second one is,
Hold on.
I'm going to.
I want to touch on that for a second, because as you were
Sure.
talking, I think something hit
Yeah,
me.
go ahead.
I want to push back a bit on the CEO decision,
Please. Yeah.
because it's more a founder decision than a CEO decision, right? Because a founder starts a company and then
Yeah.
decides if they want to run the company and be CEO, or they want to bring in, this is
Right.
like nuance, right? It's not that important, but
Right. You're the founder or you're the chairman of the board
you're not
more
this,
than,
and you can decide you also want to be the CEO, because there's so many
yes.
people who have wealth who do not give a damn about it. They don't want to manage it. They don't want to run it. They founded it. They want to give it to someone they trust who has the expertise, right?
Sure. But then I guess the question, and so the difference is, so I think whether you CEO, founder, I think those are semantics, and let's work that out. But let's agree that you're the founder. And then the question that I have, though, is then, and this to me is whether you are going to be you're choosing to be the chairman of the board or not, is then how are you going to ensure that they're following, and I think the question is are they just executing and you have, I'll take whatever you provide, or are you actually setting the vision and the strategy and having some measurement and management of what they're doing? Because if so, that to me is some type of a leadership position versus this concept of where I do see people coming saying, I just want this done for me, and I want to reap all these benefits, right?
Do you have any insight into which is more common to those families who have wealth? Those who want to be the CEO and want to actively manage it, versus those who want to hand over the reins to someone else who manage it, and they're going to just stay in the founder seat or board seat or whatever you want to call it?
I don't have any like concrete data on that, because the fact that I think that people coming to me for education, like all of them want to be in one of the other two seats that says, I either want to be a active CEO or I want to be a CEO that delegates, meaning that I want to actually then understand how do I actually select really good partners, and I want to then set my vision, strategy, goals, give that to them, and then I want to manage them throughout the year, again with less overhead, less responsibility, but you are owning that, say that delegation responsibility. But
All
I don't
right.
have any good numbers on
No,
how many people
it's a
want it done.
self-selection process. You're right. Someone is already
Yep.
coming to you. It assumes that they probably want a more active role in that, or else they wouldn't be coming to you.
I think
Um,
it changes over time too. Like if you're somebody that's been a Gen 1 wealth builder, I think a lot of times, and you feel like you're young still, you may want to be involved, but there's a good chance that as you get older, and your wealth grows, and especially if you start looking at Gen 2, Gen 3, or your spouse taking over, you probably need to get things set up to where somebody else is able to. Because a lot of times the Gen 1 spouse is not as interested or able to take it over. So if you haven't done your work to sort of like start to prepare that on-ramp for them, that can be
Yeah.
an issue. Or if you're going to go straight to Gen 2, again, where you're educating and having somebody ready to go and you've spent years with them in that role where they're ready for it. And I think that's one of the key things is this is going to go is that educating and keeping that plan going forward and understanding how this is going to work. Because otherwise it just crashes. If you're a micromanager and built it and then you're running it and then you die and no one else has any plan, you're going to have to abdicate and hope that you find that they pick the right person, or
True.
somebody could easily come along and screw it all up and then it's gone. And that's where your shirt sleeves is sleeves in 3 generations.
That's right.
So
That's
the
right.
first step is basically, are you going to be the active CEO of this and manage it on your own, or are you going to be the active CEO and delegate? Those are the questions, right? And then what is the next
Yeah.
step that you usually talk about after that?
Well, I mean, the next step is then still in that same spot that then either way you need to then start setting the vision and strategy of what is this wealth for? That's the next thing. So the reason that, Rockefeller's family has been so successful is that they had this vision and purpose that their wealth was for the betterment of humanity. So they have a very strong charitable arm, and everybody is invested in managing the investment. So it supports the family and then also supports this mission. But having that purpose for your wealth is very important, to ensure that it then continues. And this has been some studies done into very successful family offices that your wealth needs to have a purpose that's more than just, you know, taking big vacations every few months, right? And so that's sort of the next thing is then setting the strategy and then putting, your values into it too. What do those values mean? How do you want those brought to life? And then that will then translate into sort of the next thing, which is understanding what is then your portfolio structure to meet those objectives, right? Then all of a sudden you start moving from I'm the CEO setting the strategy to then, okay, what is then the architecture need to be and so on.
It's interesting because when I think about having that strategy, the most basic aspect of it is understanding what am I aiming for from a monetary standpoint. Because you're going to ask
Mm.
people who have wealth, they might know what their asset allocation is, but what is the number they're looking to achieve with this asset allocation? Like the number in terms of growth. And that's just a subset of what you're talking about, right? Because you're talking about the
Yeah.
much bigger picture. That within that subset is what is your number? And then you build your allocation based on it trying to achieve that number.
Well, so that again, that's more of a drawdown philosophy, I think, coming from personal finance. So when you really think family offices, when they talk about portfolio architecture, the first thing they look at is portfolio categories. So they're going to be looking at they take all of their assets and they look at them through the lens of three categories: growth, income, capital preservation. And when I think about achieving my goals, how much do I need to grow? And it's the job of that capital is to grow. How much do I need to actually generate income for the family, depending on the generation? And then how much do I need in liquid capital reserves that's growing faster than inflation to manage that? And they set their goals in the middle, and then they adjust those dials to really come up with okay, here's what we actually need from an asset allocation to support this vision. So the thing that I think we get taught in personal finance, and so this journey for me, like I had to unlearn a lot of this middle class mindset and a lot of the personal finance education that, the number that I read that really was the impetus for me to start this business is 87% financial education that comes at us as executives, as business owners from these larger firms. 87% of us, they're selling something on the back end. So it's not unbiased when you walk into, and so I learned a lot of this because a great friend from undergrad has been the chief investment officer for a number of single family offices for the last 15 years. And so he opened the books and showed me how it runs and has introduced me to some friends as well so I can understand this playbook. But the way that they look at portfolios is they're looking at it as an evergreen engine, and so they're going to have a very specific architecture. They don't think about number. The number's already way bigger than they need. They're not thinking about drawdown, let it grow and draw down. That's for the other people. They're actually architecting and tuning it to meet the family's objectives.
I like that. And those three buckets change depending on, I guess, also the size of wealth, right? Because the higher you up, the more important those buckets are, the lower you are, right? You're not thinking as much about,
Yeah.
preservation. You might be thinking about income and growth. And there are
Well,
some,
or again, depending on some of the bets they're making, how big it is. And the thing is what actually goes into the preservation bucket is different too. Like we think about preservation, I do personally, where I'm looking at Bill and I'm looking at different things that are trying to grow faster than inflation, but are still very liquid. Their capital preservation maybe we actually own a whole building in downtown Los Angeles, and we're going to make sure that we're getting the cash flow off of that. And if this other big business thing goes bad, we can actually then sell that and get an infusion of capital, right? Their whole mindset and the way they analyze those buckets is different, but the structure and the strategy always remains the same.
I'm curious from a tactical standpoint through that methodology, is an asset defined to be solely owned or solely tracked or managed in a specific bucket, or can an asset apply to all three buckets?
Well, generally speaking, the asset is going to have so you have to think about it like a job description, and you have to think about it like a job. It will have a primary role. So for example, real estate, they will have a primary bucket that says you are income, right? And it's going to sit in there. Now, if it has some auxiliary benefit of growth, that then is just overall benefit to the portfolio. But its job, of how they're tracking it and managing it is because they need to meet that income goal to make sure and fund the family's expenses.
Got it. So each of those buckets has its own goal. If it's
That's
growth, then it
correct.
has a number of growth. If it's income, it has a number for income. And if it's preservation, it has a number for preservation. And if you split assets across those three categories, you need to be able to meet those objectives or those goals in each bucket.
That's right.
Um, so one asset can be used to write off different goals. That's what you're saying, basically, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that's more prevalent in larger portfolios where you do have larger assets, but yes.
Well, if I own a multifamily building that's
Yeah.
generating
No,
cash flow for like 30 years,
run 100. Yes, you can. And again, that's a nice, and you're right. That could be a 20 unit apartment building where you have the capital preservation is the fact you have no debt on it. And then you're using it for the income because you're getting the income off of it.
right?
100%. Yeah. I just try to, you're jumping to some advanced stuff. I try to, teach
We
the
got
basics.
we
I
got
got
advanced people.
Latan like already going to like, the 301. I'm like, we're trying to do the 101 here, please.
All right, yeah, we got
You
to
know,
sophisticated people on the call. I mean, come
I
on.
know, I know, I know. And this is why I appreciate you. You stretch me. I always feel stretched.
Uh,
Yeah,
in a good
it's
way.
good.
So,
In a
so,
good way.
all
I'll
right,
scream if it's not. Okay.
all right. So what's the next step after your family defines those buckets, the strategies, and then next step.
Well, so the next step, right, is I mean, those two buckets, if you think about it like that, that is truly the foundation. And there's more nuance beneath those, but just at the highest level, if you think about it, those two, the vision and the strategy of the family, and then that translate to some business goals, and then your portfolio structure inside of that is and I want to make sure that we go back to like what Mike was saying, is there is a investment policy where you go and declare as a family what is going to be inside of each of those categories, what's going to be our regular allocation sizing, what's going to be then allocation sizing that then needs checks and balances if we're making a larger investment, right? But there's that, and then there's also what's called an investment thesis, where you're understanding what you're ultimately trying to achieve. But that truly is then the foundation for your portfolio, right? Or sorry, for your family office. Then you move to operations. So then you get to things like legal and tax. You get to all of what are your operational processes that go there, your performance and data, right? Those are the things then that really are the engine of your family office. And then you get to these things called leverage, where that's your team and advisors. And then that's when you also then get to your governance, like who is going to be running this from the day-to-day perspective, who are going to be people that you can delegate responsibilities to that you can then get to manage. But that's sort of those are all the seven components of a billion-dollar family office like the Waltons or a micro family office with, $2 million in investable assets. It's the same.
What do you see the biggest friction wealth owners have trying to implement like a family office or micro family office type strategy?
Well, the friction is that everybody wants to jump to tactics and they don't want to do the strategic work, right? Because the reality is when you think about it, going and executing investments, right? That's tactical, right? So then doing some of this work up front, that's where, I think people get stuck. I think the other biggest, so the two biggest friction points I see from people being able to just move forward with their wealth for us, first generation high net worth, like that's who I work with, is number one is the education. Many people don't understand that this stuff is not rocket science. It's not. I mean, they're called wealth management companies for a reason. They manage systems, and it's the same thing when you look at a, single family office. Like the reason that they're so successful is they operate like a business and they have systems. But I think people don't understand this fundamental framework, haven't been taught. So I think education is a big barrier to this. I also think the other barrier is that for many of us, and this is why I'm so supportive of communities like this, is that the number one challenge that first generation high net worth struggle with is isolation. Because many times when all of a sudden you come into this wealth, I know mine happened in an instant, right? I went through an IPO in 2012. In an instant, all of a sudden I had $4 million in the account. It's like, what the bleep just happened? When I went and tried to talk to my family members and talk about, like, I was worried, concerned, wasn't sure what to do. What I got back was, what are you complaining about? You just won the lottery, right? That was disrespecting of my mindset, wasn't hearing me. And then also my years of hard work all of a sudden got wiped out the window too. So I think between the fact that we want to make moves on the street, we want to get tactical very quickly, we're not educated in this isolation thing, I think all of those are like the top three blockers, I think, from people like being able to really dig into this and understand it.
It's funny. I always have this analogy where you'll talk with people who will spend hours finding the cheapest or best flight, and saving a couple $1,000, but they won't spend the same amount of time, thinking about their wealth in a certain way or thinking about an investment, because it's like it might be too intimidating, but it's so untangible, right? To think
Yeah.
I'm going to invest that time, but I want to see the ROI today. Whereas what you're talking about is this strategic planning. The ROI is
Yeah.
not today by definition. That's the whole
Uh-uh.
idea of the strategic planning, right?
Right.
Um,
Exactly. It's not today. And then the other thing too, Latan, is like think about the fact like, and taking like your legacy statement and sitting down at the dinner table and reading it out loud with your kids and saying, "Hey, mom and I, like we broke through, here's our story, and we're building this business that, we want you guys to be a part of one day." I think many people put that off, and then the next thing you know, people are hearing about all of this stuff like at the reading of a will or an estate plan when the effort to do that is not that hard.
we had a conversation a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago with on one of these calls with a guy, Josh Gentine, I think. Mike, were you on that call with Josh about family dynamics around managing wealth?
Yeah. Mhm.
We had a whole conversation about it because it's like people don't talk about money with their kids enough. And the worst case is that when a kid starts, when their friends know that talk to them about their money before the kids know they have money, it's like the worst thing because the kid isn't
Yeah,
prepared about it. So
Right.
that whole sort of setting expectations, those family dynamics, it's part of that strategic planning part that you're talking about. And I also think there's a lot of people who don't have, those tens of millions of dollars in net worth, and they think, well, that's such an overkill. I'm still like in building mode and I
yeah,
want to achieve like, or I think there's no amount where it doesn't make sense, where it's too small to have that conversation and think about strategic decisions we make around it.
I think
agreed.
it depends what you're planning to do. I mean, like if you're planning to give away all your money and your kids get, a little bit while you're alive, and then, nothing upon your death goes to them, well, then you probably don't have to prepare them that much with it. But if you're planning on having generational gifting to where you're planning to try to set up future generations and hoping to, the education part and making sure that they understand the why and what the intention is the most important thing. That's what I think throws people off. But I think as a Gen 1, it's up to you to decide what do you want. It could be whatever you feel like. Maybe you want to spend it all yourself.
But the core is that you have to make that decision. I think people don't make the
Yeah.
decision, right?
Yeah.
They think someone else is going to make the decision for them. And I think that's like what Christopher's alluding to, that you either you've made a decision or you haven't, you need to make a decision that you are the CEO of this company that's called wealth,
Yeah.
or you delegate it as a CEO, or you find another CEO. But you have to still make a
Right.
decision.
But I think
Right.
especially
Because
if
no,
you're
I was just
Gen,
going to. My
go
God.
ahead, Chris.
Let me just get it in. It's just a one liner. It's just really, if you choose not to decide, you still have ultimately made a choice.
Sure.
Mike, is that what you want to say?
No, I was just going to say that I think where I see Gen 1 go the worst is where they have an intention, but they're not sharing it with Gen 2. They're not preparing. They're not doing the work ahead of time. They're micromanaging everything and keeping control and not sharing what their plans are. They're not educating Gen 2 to sort of be ready to take over, and they're not, taking care of those things, but yet they have that intention. And maybe they're
Yeah.
even trying to control things from the grave with their trust or the way that things happen afterwards, but then they haven't prepared the next generation and the generation after that to really steward it in such a way
Right.
that I think you're setting them up for failure in that kind of
Yeah.
thing, versus deciding early what you want and then having a good plan and going forward with it, whatever that is.
Yep.
So I have a bunch more questions that we can dive into, Christopher, but I do want to remind people here, guys, if you have any questions or have any feedback or input, please unmute yourself or put it in the chat, okay? So Christopher, I have a practical question then, all right? Because, one of the reasons family offices have always been reserved for the ultra wealthy is because the the processes are expensive because of human capital, because of technological capital, or just because of mindset.
Mm.
What do you see? And obviously we're both into, like, what do you see from a technological standpoint is making this now more accessible to the lower net worth? Obviously, putting Visor aside, which is a huge lever, but like put Visor aside, just
I
what
know.
what else?
Massive. Well, I mean, I think you think about right now, like you can have, you can get quality bookkeeping. So one of the things that I advocate for is I don't do any of my personal books anymore. So my personal books, my management company, holding company, all done by a bookkeeper. I just read the results. But you can drive down the cost of the technology, the cost of the execution there, from those types of things. And same thing with again, all of the fundamentals of running a family office, I think, are there. The other technology, I think, between, if you think about good accounting platforms, I think services are coming down, right? I mean, I think the thing that I'm finding is like estate attorneys that then give you, oh, hey, here's our, $700 a year additional subscription so that you can make any edits throughout the year, reminding me to get a meeting on my calendar to make sure that I'm annually managing my estate plan. Is everything in it? Is everything done right? Just one meeting a year where you just do sort of your sanity check on that. I'm finding that, now graduating from CPAs to CTPs, right? Most people treat tax as a compliance exercise they do at the end of the year. Well, you can spend an extra 1,500, $2,000 a year and move to strategic tax planning with certified tax planners that have done a lot of ultra high net worth. Now they're coming down, building their own shops, subscription services that allow you to get into a forward-looking cadence that allows you to, significantly drop your tax bill. But I think a lot of these things are out there that help us just, I mean, again, you think of anything that's used for a small business, that's exactly what this is. And the more you formalize it, the more you actually get into a cadence with this. And AI is going to help us accelerate that even more.
Have you seen any families who've managed to utilize AI to the extent where they just use AI for each of those different aspects of their family office or their business, family business? Like, an estate planner, a tax planner, a CPA, like all those stuff. Um,
No, I haven't seen anybody like truly like replace the people. I mean, I definitely like the thing that's important to understand is like you can use AI tools to help you generate new strategies and then, make sure that you have the right people to execute it. But I haven't seen people take that over. Now, I have seen people um, definitely use AI to build better like investment management tools. Like I know a lot of people that are, especially people that are doing, let's say, options trading and things like that, that have very sophisticated, let's say, stock portfolios. I've seen them use AI to help manage that a lot better.
I think at this point in time, that would be a very foolish thing to do if you were trusting AI to replace the trusted, tax advisors and lawyers and stuff like that. I mean, maybe that comes eventually, but right now I would say that's a really bad
I
idea.
think we are so close to that. You guys are underestimating it. I think if you take I mean, it's a whole separate conversation, but hold on, I want to give Anoop a chance to ask a question or mention something. What's up, Anoop?
Yeah. So, I've been kind of going back and forth about this very conversation as we're talking about how do I organize, my family's wealth. And I feel like to some extent I'm in like this, I don't know, I call it like a no man's land, where, if you have, low eight-figure wealth, you're not quite at the level of having a true family office where you're gonna have, three or four professionals working exclusively for you. And you're certainly looking for things that maybe outside of the normal, catchment of, someone's got, seven-figure wealth in terms of getting access to kind of high quality deal flow as relates to some, advanced tax strategies and alternative investments and strategies and so forth. So, at that kind of, low eight-figure net worth, it's kind of like, well, what do you do, right? I mean, do you try to do this on your own in terms of this micro family office concept? Or do you go to I wouldn't call this you call like an RIA because they do much more than an RIA. They kind of really do what I call family wealth management, which means they are investing your money, of course. They are doing deal sourcing and due diligence for you, but they are also thinking about structure and governance and helping you with trust documentation and creating family LLPs and talking about tax strategy and so forth. And the part that doesn't sit with me well is just paying someone, fees, like, 60 basis points, 70 basis points, whatever it may be, just to serve that role when I could be potentially doing it myself, educating myself, and just outsourcing these to, an accounting team or legal team on a kind of a fee for service basis. The part that doesn't sit well with me is actually what you mentioned many times before is like that CEO position about, when the rubber meets the road, who's going to manage it, right? And I can imagine a time where my kids are not teenagers, but they're 25-year-olds, and a deal goes bad, or a trust document, has some provision that they're not happy with, and there's family infighting, and maybe you have an in-law that's really kind of causing a disturbance in the whole system whatsoever. You really do need a level of, I guess the word is training, like someone who knows how to do that, or someone who's necessarily a founder or a medical professional that built up their wealth has never been really kind of taught how to do. And at that point, it's not necessarily just earning, a good investment return at a 7% clip or 10% clip, whatever it may be. It's not about just, doubling your wealth every 10 years. It's actually, having a happy family and preserving that wealth and kind of serving the entire family purpose. So, do you feel like if I said I'm going to be the CEO of the family, I could actually sit around a table with 10 different family members and six different trusts and 10 different viewpoints and really manage that effectively? Or do you think that that will be better outsourced through a wealth management team?
That's it.
Well, I mean, I just answer the question like whoever, like, I guess two things. Number one is I don't know what you're talking about is you're talking about personalities, dynamics, and from coming from the corporate world and understanding being in boardrooms where people have different agendas and desires, right? That's managing a high emotional political situation, and I don't know whether the RIA is going to be equipped for that if they actually have experience doing that and that's their strong suit, or the family. But I know that what I'm choosing to do with my family, right, is I'm choosing to make sure that there's clarity in sort of like the operating rules of who actually gets a vote, right? And understanding that. And I'm also trying to make sure that now my boys are 13 and 11, that they're understanding here's the responsibility. I'm trying to give them the training that they need now to be able to manage it in the future. That's what I'm doing to as a practitioner of family office to be able to preserve my wealth, because I honestly don't know, if the next generation of RIA, if they're going to be equipped to do that, but I know that I can plant those seeds in my own family. And that's from experience.
Anoop, I would say there's just like you said, if you want to CEO it and sort of quarterback the whole thing, there are groups out there that are experienced in that, and that's all that they do. And so then that's another trusted advisor that you can bring in, that they'll
Mhm.
sit down and they'll sit with you and the Gen 1 team and plan everything out and get a written document and then have the family meetings and help facilitate that. So
Mhm.
just like all the other aspects of
Mhm.
doing this, if you want to be the CEO and sort of like manage all that, then great. You can find great
Sure.
resources. And there's
And
several out
and
there that are really good, that's all they do is that one portion of it.
and,
And
and sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say that right now, I mean, if I do a lot through my wealth management, I would consider myself the CEO in the sense that, I mean, they could be a chief investment officer, for example, but I'm the one that's actually signing off on the decision making and so forth in terms of whether we invest in this fund or not. Um, how do you address, what I would call like the key man risk factors? So if something happened to me, I had a sudden death, right? And I'm the one that knew all the intricacies of all the different trusts and the family vision and the tax planning and structure. And everyone, I'm kind of navigating these family dynamics, but there's really no one that I'm kind of breeding in myself over the course of the next 5 to 7 years because I don't have a natural successor. My kids are too young to do that. How do you kind of think about that in terms of creating such level of intricacy without really having a succession planning because there's really not an adequate successor and you're basically CEO running it on your own.
Well, it's up to you to set that up. You need to find who that's going to be and figure that out. If you're going to be the key man that's going to be the problem, you need to know who's going to take over and have that written out in your documents and a plan set up and the other people knowing. And that could be another outside source or whatever, but that's on you to come up with it. And that's one of the responsibilities. If you're going to take that on and to not outsource it, then you've got that as another weak point that then you have to plan for and be ready to take over so it doesn't fall apart when you die.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Anoop, my strategy is this, right? Because I do have young kids, is I definitely have an executor on tap that understands how my business, the investing side of it is done and can actually execute and still run my business. And then from a decision-making perspective, I have my nephew. I always try to look to youth, but he is very business savvy. He and I are incredibly close, and I have been reading him in over the past 3 to 5 years on sort of our vision, our strategy, so that he understands how to be that CEO, help navigate, make decisions. And he's actually ridden along with me as I'm working with my parents, and we're actually making some, as their health is declining and doing other things. Like I'm trying to pull him into an environment where it is emotionally challenging and doing things. And he's stepped up. So this is where I feel good that he's going to be on this board. And then the third member is that I have my cousin who's a year or two younger than me, who's actually then going to be able to be sort of a board of advisors. But again, from a practitioner perspective, I'm trying to make sure that can I have a pro run the business who understands my investment and portfolio? Yes. Then can
Mhm.
I surround it with who's going to help make some of those family decisions and navigate some of those things and also help bring up my boys, right, in the way that they need to so that they can eventually take the CEO reins one day.
Right.
Yeah, it's all a matter of finding those people you can trust. It's the most difficult part of any aspect of our wealth, right? Even people we invest with.
Yeah. And the
Well,
trade-off becomes, if you're going to outsource to someone else, is paying the AUM fees, right? And I guess at some level you kind of reach like, I don't know, I call it like an escape velocity, right? Where, you can tag whatever wealth you want, but you have enough for your retirement. You've given enough to your kids to make them comfortable, whatever number you decide on you want to give your kids, and said, I'm just going to stop it right there because there is a concept of, what Warren Buffett calls, give them enough to do something but not do nothing, whatever that number is for you. Maybe it's 2 million, maybe it's 5 million, maybe it's 10 million, whatever that number is, but it is a number. And then once you've kind of done that, then it's either the charity or government or kind of grandkids, right? So, paying someone, 60 basis points, whatever it may be, it's not changing your trajectory, it's not changing your kid's trajectory. It's basically gonna either impact your kind of charitable giving or estate taxes, I guess.
I want to give Nate here a chance. What's up, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I can seg right into this. I think that was a good Anoop's question was a nice lead in for me. I mean, I'm second gen and 56 years old, and so I'm at the center right now. Sounds like Anoop, you and I are doing about the same thing in our families, and I'm at this crossroads, right, where we're not big enough to go hire a person to run this, or maybe we are, but I'm also contemplating just retiring and stepping down now from the position versus 5 years
Hmm.
in the future, right? And so what do we do? Who do we go get? What's that person look like? How much do they cost? And yeah, I'm trying not to pay those AUM fees either. So I could talk about this all day long. It's very pertinent to my situation right now. But my question really is I guess maybe the tech stack, right? Like, how are we managing this? I think Latam, when I first met you, I was like, hey, can I run all this through Visor? Well, it seems to work for an individual, but I'm struggling with how do I manage this for 3 generations of people? What software do I get? How do I do that? Where do I go? Like, I don't know how to use the tracking of all this. We're 80% active owner operators of apartments, but we're transitioning in the next 10 years to full-time investing. So I'm struggling with where do I take us? Because right now we're doing all this management on inside the property management software and Excel spreadsheets. Like, it's really wonky right now. So I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with the technology component. Kids age 15 to parents that are, really, really old, right? So I don't know how to do that. I'd like to hear your feedback.
So, I mean, I can talk to sort of the tech stack, at least from Visor and what's in the
That'd be
industry.
great.
I'm sure Christopher can also address like what, microfamily offices leverage. But before I even dive into that, because your first question was more around Anoop's point, and that's finding that person or organization that you can trust with those fallbacks. And I do know a lot of people who just go directly to a multifamily office, depending obviously on wealth levels. But for most people that have those issues, what I've heard them doing is going to a multifamily office, and then that MFO usually has a very robust tech stack to support a multi-generational family. And so that goes to the second part of it. I mean, yeah, Visor is built for the individual to manage their family's wealth from a tracking perspective, to delegate access to other family members as well. But it's not, intended to be a institutional level or like advisory level piece of software where you have, different levels of access to different aspects of your wealth. And then, the financial planning component, tax planning component, all those other components, which, I'm sure one of those MFOs do offer. That's just what I've heard, and I don't know. Christopher probably has another aspect of this, but when I talk with people that are in the 20 to 100 million, and they might even be using Visor to consolidate everything because they want an overview
Yeah.
and do things on their own, but they might also have an MFO that is like their quarterback or is their trusted, advisor or does the actual investments that are more publicly traded or all those type of stuff. So I don't know, Christopher, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think along the same lines. I mean, I think that for like, obviously Visor is a part of our tech stack, right? And I think that when you are thinking of that, let's say 100 million and below, honestly, right? I mean, I think you're looking at a collection of tools or you do leverage the multifamily office who then they have access to a larger set of tools that then you would, because of the fact that you're engaging their services, get a hold of. But I think the challenge is that there's just this big gap between like the holistic nature of some of these larger tools that are available on the institutional side, and then what we get here running a, micro family office, if you will.
And I'll be honest, like I don't know if you guys, I'm a very big advocate for what's happening in AI. I do believe that it's much more advanced than people give it to, not from the, doomer standpoint, it's replacing people's jobs, but from a productivity and ability to build and ship things so fast. If you just put your mind to it, give it a day and try to play around with it, you can create so many automations and processes to leverage the existing tech of these AIs. If you just have the patience to dive into it. And Nate, if you want, we can hop on a call at some point, and I'm happy to walk you through some stuff. But um, yeah, I am in the
Okay.
camp that believe that what Christopher and Mike think is happening in terms of like the professional advisors. I think you can accomplish a lot of what they do today and much more even in the next 6 months than most people think you can do.
I,
That's
I,
personal.
I will say that if you're someone that has a decent amount allocated to various alternatives, whether it's private equity or real estate or various private credit funds, and you're not quite sure or have a line of sight into the manager where you can kind of easily call them up and figure out what's going on. Sometimes doing the liquidity management becomes pretty challenging. If you have, let's say, 10 to 20 different funds that are calling capital at different cadences and distributing capital very erratically without any sort of insight into that, that becomes challenging no matter what software you have. And sometimes having, an advisor that can really kind of help maintain a certain kind of tight range of just cash liquidity, as opposed to being, overly liquid or even having to sell capital or sell, equity just to, provide a capital call or take a line of credit, whatever it may be. That becomes a very challenging thing to do on your own. It's just a very complicated process.
Cool. Well,
Advisor can help with that.
Advisor 100% helps with that. But I mean, I think we're gonna have a weekly call. We just walk through Visor again. I make sure everyone's on the same page of what Visor can and cannot do.
Yeah,
But all
because
right,
it's got that function where you're plugging everything in, Anoop, and it'll tell you that in 2027 you're expecting 3 of your 20 deals to go full cycle, and here's the amount, and then here's the cash flow that should be coming from the other ones, and that kind of thing, and it's all lined out there. So it's a great forecasting tool that way. Now you don't know that that's going to be what it is, but it's like the best forecast you have is what they're telling you until they tell you something different, but it gives you that idea so you can figure that stuff out.
I appreciate it. I mean, I'm not trying to plug Visor too much here. That's not the goal. I'm saying that it's possible if you give any process a chance of organizing that for you. And a good advisor will do the same thing. It just will cost you a lot of money. And I just don't think it makes sense to pay people that much money to do some administrative stuff at the state of AI that we're in today and technology that we're in today. But that's not part of this conversation. I mean, unless you guys, we can have a separate one around it. But Christopher, anything else you want to touch upon around, the idea of a microfamily office, the idea of managing your own family in a business from a business perspective? Is there anything you want to touch upon before we sort of wrap up?
I mean, I think the thing that I'm hearing here that I do think is most important is I think it's easy for us to gravitate towards the office, towards the structure, towards the investments, but the reality is that it's about family. And the reality is that, what I've come to understand is that, really thinking about how I understand who in my family wants to participate in a generational wealth business, who wants to contribute, who wants to help create this thing is just really important. And I am spending more time there to understand that because I do think that it's one of the keys to generational wealth. So just want to leave that for you.
Awesome. Christopher, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to share your info in the recording that I send out afterwards. And you guys are more than welcome to reach out to Christopher for any questions or stuff,
Please.
I'm sure. Next week is spring break. We're going to have a session that's going to be kind of different. More on that to come in the email. But I hope you all have a great rest of your week and make some smart decisions and think about what you're doing as a family office would. Have a great one, guys. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much.